prior to being a executive coach and organizational development consultant, I spent 15 years in the oil and gas industry. So if you can imagine Patty in the 90s moving into that field, there really weren't very many women. So oftentimes it was Patty and about 40 guys everywhere I went. And what I discovered in that experience was moving from being a student where I was very outspoken and strong and smart and graduating top of my class, that going into that field, I often felt underconfident and daunted. And so there were many cases where I felt like I had to moderate my voice, kind of shush myself. I didn't know when to speak, etc. And part of it was because I was a minority, a woman in a field dominated by men. But part of it was often because I was the youngest person or because I was the only geologist in a room full of engineers. And what I discovered as I started moving into that field was that I wasn't the only one that felt shushed. I don't know how many other people must have had this experience where you're stepping into a room full of people and you just don't know whether you should say anything. Or maybe you have a great idea and you can't get a word in edgewise, or maybe your boss isn't listening. This happens so many cases. And I can't tell you how many brilliant people that I ran into that felt comfortable talking to me in private. But when we got in a room where those ideas needed to come out, they just kind of stayed under the table. And oftentimes this had disastrous consequences where we proceeded to do things that we all knew in the room were really not sound to do. And part of it was because we just didn't have the right environment, the right psychological safety, and the right permission to bring our voice in the room. So I got really interested in how to shift that. I created a affinity group for women, one of the first in the energy industry. And that really helped a lot. We gave each other tips on how to speak up. We emboldened one another. But still, it was difficult. And it really was the culture and the environment. So when I went to school, I studied all of these wonderful ideas and modalities in how to bring inclusive processes into decision-making, into strategic planning, to make sure that everyone was empowered. But what I found was that often took a really long time because they were very theoretical, very academic. And oftentimes by the time that we implemented the process, people just didn't have enough time to get the work done. And so they would lose interest and would just kind of lose momentum over time. When I moved into organizational development leadership, that the most important thing was how can we make these inclusive practices as simple and practical as possible so that we have the opportunity to bring them into the room where we're not just a bunch of geeks that care about culture and leadership and organizational development. But oftentimes when you walk into a room, that's not what you're walking into. You're walking into a room where time is money. And I can tell you, as the owner of my own business, I know time is money because every hour my payroll is burning through. I want to make sure we're making hay while the sun shines so we can stay alive as a business. It really is the reality. So how do we combine those realities? Our aspirational goals of being inclusive, of making sure no one's marginalized, that all good ideas make it to the table, that bad ideas get removed, while also doing it efficiently.